Hi there, this is Justin Kaplan with Utah Child Law, also known as Southern Utah Child Custody and Abuse Law. That's just a little bit more of a mouthful. I just wanted to give a shout out to the grandparents out there. There's a lot of grandparents here in our community in Southern Utah, throughout our state and really throughout the country that step up and take care of their grandkids when their own children, their adult children, are struggling with things. And so I looked up a few statistics. So according to the U.S. Census, there are 6.7 million grandparents who have grandchildren living with them, or they live with their grandchildren. Of those, about 2.1 million of them, the grandparent is the primary caretaker for these kids. They're the ones that are taking care of the children, not just residing in the home. So 6.7 million living in the same home, 2.1 million that are responsible for their grandchildren. In Utah, the numbers that I found is that there are about 65,000 grandparents living in the same homes as their grandchildren. And of those, just under 16,000 are the ones that are caring for their grandchildren, the primary caregivers. And an estimated about 24,000 children that live with their grandparents and not their own parents, where the grandparents are the primary caretaker for those kids. So, and then of course, in addition to these, where it's the primary, exclusive care provider in the home, there's also many grandparents that financially support their grandchildren, that assist with childcare when needed, and in countless other ways. So grandparents are amazing. Grandparents help the world go around, and they've really had to stand up. There's a lot of people with vices that are really struggling today, and the grandparents come in and help. And it puts the grandparents sometimes in a difficult spot when they see their grandchildren suffering. They don't want to enable their own children, their adult children, because they want to help. They want to help with a permanent help, meaning so that the parent, the ideal is that the parent can get themselves situated and figured out, and if they're on drugs or something, they can get into rehab, they can get that taken care of, and hopefully leave that behind where that parent can take care of their children. And that's obviously the best situation, is if the parents can take care of their own children. The children love and want to be with their parents. But these grandparents that really step in and help, because there's so many situations where the parents just can't or aren't doing that. And it's a balance. Sometimes, grandparents are there to help, but sometimes they're afraid that if they step in and maybe step too far, that they might alienate their child and burn bridges. And certainly that's a risk that can happen. And then sometimes the grandparents are able to step in, and there's just no other choice at times. But there are a few different legal methods to get custody, to be able to have that authority to take care of the grandchildren. And some are cooperative ones, a traditional guardianship, which is through probate court in our state of Utah. Then that's if the parents are either deceased or stipulate to it, if they agree, if they consent, then a guardianship can be provided, so that then a grandparent can take those guardianship orders and letters, is what it's called, register for school, make transfers, take care of healthcare things, that sort of thing. And that's great, and that works well for most situations, and it's a cooperative way, because it requires the consent. You can't do it without the consent of the parent, or with the parent being deceased. And the downside is, if you've got a child, an adult child who maybe is going off to prison or is in the middle of their vice, if they come back, all they have to do is revoke consent of that guardianship, and they have to file it with the court and stuff. But it's not the judge making a decision based on the best interest of the children. If it's entered through that guardianship route, through that cooperative consent route, then once that consent is not there, then the guardianship has to terminate, and then the children are back with the parent. I've helped parents do that. They've come back, and the grandparent or the aunt or the former sister-in-law or whoever it might be has guardianship, and it was through that consent process. And and they don't think that it's best, the grandparent or the aunt or whoever doesn't think it's best for the kids, for this parent who's been kind of unstable, to come back and be back involved. But that's, I've helped parents to come in and do that and end the guardianship to get their kids back. So because of that, sometimes that may not be like, if it's based purely on the consent, and as soon as the parent comes back or is able, then the kids are going to go back there, and that is the plan, and that works, then great. The guardianship route is the best route. There's other routes that can make it more, if it is contested, there can be a child protective order filed. That would only be a very temporary thing, 150 days if it's filed against a parent. That's if there's been, if there is kind of some ongoing or present physical or sexual abuse of the child, or imminent danger of that. That's a very temporary thing, but that's one that potentially could burn the bridge. If you're filing a protective order against your adult child, then that could be a problem. And then there's also through the juvenile court, there's a abuse and neglect petition. That's almost always filed by DCFS, but the law allows for an interested person to come in and file that on behalf of a kid, and through that kind of action, maybe get a temporary custody order, and eventually maybe get a permanent custody and guardianship order. The permanent custody and guardianship is a very strong one. That's like the final step. That's probably a bad way to put it. It's not that it's a step, but it's the closest order to a termination of parental rights and adoption that you can get without actually terminating the rights. But a parent who has been subject to PCNG, a permanent custody and guardianship order, that parent doesn't have the right to come back and contest that later. Once it's gone through the process and exhausted any appeals or not appealed, that sort of thing. But so that's a permanent thing. Another one would be through the district court. And so those ones are through juvenile court. Regular guardianship is district court with through the probate code. There's also a statute for the Custody and Visitation for Individuals Other Than Parents Act. And that one allows for, and it's very strict requirements, and I'll probably do a separate video specifically on that. Because if you're going through the district court, oftentimes that's the best route if it's going to be a potentially contested, or if you want it to be not just revocable upon the revocation of consent by the parent. And but you have to show some very, very specific things that are outlined in there. And this was a few years ago, the Supreme Court of Utah overturned provisions of it. Maybe didn't overturn provisions, but found certain things in there unconstitutional, or that there had to be a higher standard in order to overcome the constitutional presumption that a parent's decision is in the best interest of a child. And so the code was updated, 3 or 4 years ago to include the things that the Supreme Court of Utah had found. And so it's a very high standard. Most people are not able to meet that, but a lot of grandparents or aunts or uncles or people who have stepped in, a lot of them are able to meet that. Again, if you're able to hit every single part of that code. But so those are just a few different options. Didn't get into detail on those, but a few different options where a grandparent can have custody, can have guardianship, that sort of thing, to be able to take care of the needs of their grandchildren and take care of them. But I just want to give a shout out because I've been seeing quite a few grandparents lately that are doing that have done that, and it makes a huge difference in these kids' lives. Is it the ideal situation? No. Ideally, they would be with the parents, and the parents would be competent and able to do that. But I think it's second most ideal for the grandparents to be able to step in and just very appreciated. You've already raised kids, and now you're coming in and taking care of the next generation. And those kids are lucky to have you, and our community is lucky to have you step up and do that. So thank you to all your grandparents that are out there, especially those that step in and help when needed, despite the ugly circumstances and things. Thank you for taking care of your grandkids, for loving them and helping them out.